The courtroom air crackled thick with the scent of expensive cologne and unspoken lies. All eyes were on billionaire titan Calvin Whitaker, a man who commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will. His wife Evelyn sat as still as a statue, her face an unreadable mask. For weeks, she had endured the humiliation of his legal team, painting her as a gold-digging shrew. Calvin's smirk was confident assured. He thought he had won. He thought he had silenced her. But he never saw the storm gathering behind her quiet eyes. In her hands, hidden from view, was a single, unassuming flash drive, the key to unlocking a decade of secrets and lies, poised to bring his entire empire crashing to the ground. What she did next would make headlines around the globe. The silence of Evelyn Whitaker was a living entity in the sterile, wood-paneled courtroom. It was a weighted blanket, smothering the restless coughs of the gallery, the self-important rustle of papers from her husband's legal team, and even the air-conditioned hum that was supposed to be a neutral backdrop to the dismantling of her life. For 3 weeks, she had been a spectre at her own divorce trial, a study in unnerving stillness. Her hands elegantly manicured, but with a faint tremor she concealed by clasping them in her lap, were the only betrayers of the maelstrom within. Her husband, Calvin Whitaker, a man whose name was a synonym for ruthless success in the world of private equity, sat at the opposing table. He was the sun to her shadow, a supernova of charisma and confidence. Dressed in a bespoke suit from Savile Row, his silver-streaked hair perfectly coiffed, he would occasionally cast a glance her way. It wasn't a look of concern or even of lingering affection. It was a look of triumphant pity, the kind a predator gives its cornered prey. His eyes the color of a stormy sea would say, "Look at you, my poor foolish Evelyn, so lost without me." His legal team, a phalanx of legal gladiators from the prestigious firm of Sullivan and Cromwell, moved with the synchronized precision of a predator's jaws. Leading them was the formidable Arthur Vance, a man whose jowls shook with righteous indignation as he painted Evelyn as a spendthrift, a socialite with a cavernous void, where her ambition should be a woman who had contributed nothing to the vast Whitaker empire but her pretty face and her impeccable taste in table linens. "Mrs. Whitaker," Vance had boomed on the first day, his voice echoing in the hallowed halls of the New York County Courthouse. "Would you please detail for the court your contributions to Mr. Whitaker's business endeavors? Any late nights you spent poring over financial statements? Any crucial deals you helped broker?" Evelyn's lawyer, a competent but clearly outgunned public defender named Maria Flores, had objected. "Your Honor, my client is not on trial for her business acumen." But the damage was done. The narrative had been set. Calvin Whitaker, the self-made titan. Evelyn Whitaker, the beautiful freeloader. The media packed into the press benches like sardines in a can, lapped it up. They scribbled furiously in their notebooks, their faces illuminated by the glow of their smartphones. They were there for the spectacle, for the fall of a dynasty, and the silent, beautiful wife was a tantalizing enigma. Was she in shock? Was she medicated? Or was she, as some of the more lurid tabloids suggested, simply not very bright? Evelyn let them think what they wanted. She had learned long ago that the most powerful position to be in was to be underestimated. Calvin had taught her that, though not intentionally. He had taught her many things in their 15 years of marriage, most of them harsh, painful lessons cloaked in the guise of love and protection. Her silence was not born of weakness, but of a strategy so meticulously crafted, so deeply personal that it felt like a second skin. It was a shield against the barbs of Arthur Vance, a cloak of invisibility, that allowed her to observe, to listen, to wait. Each condescending remark, each fabricated tale of her supposed extravagance was a stone she added to the fortress she was building around herself. Inside, she was anything but silent. She was a whirlwind of calculations, of memories, of a righteous fury that had been simmering for years. Today was the final day of the trial, before the judge's ruling on the division of assets. Calvin's team had presented their closing arguments, a masterful performance of legal theatre that portrayed him as a benevolent patriarch and her as a grasping opportunist. Now it was Maria Flores's turn. Her closing arguments were heartfelt, painting a picture of a devoted wife who had supported her husband, raised their 2 children, and managed their multiple households with grace and efficiency. It was a solid defense, but against the sheer firepower of Sullivan and Cromwell, it felt like a paper shield against a battering ram. As Maria's voice, earnest and clear, filled the courtroom, Evelyn's gaze drifted to Calvin. He wasn't even looking at his lawyer. His eyes were on his phone, a faint smirk playing on his lips. He was probably closing another deal, his mind already on the next conquest, the next billion. This trial was a mere annoyance, a piece of administrative fluff to be dealt with before he moved on to more important things. A cold, hard knot formed in Evelyn's stomach. It was the same knot that had been there for the last 5 years, a constant companion in her gilded cage. It was the knot of fear, of helplessness, of a slow, creeping realization that the man she had loved was a stranger, a monster hiding in plain sight. She thought of their early years, of the man who had swept her off her feet. He had been a rising star then, not the behemoth he was now. He had been charming, attentive, and his ambition had been intoxicating. He had made her feel like the center of his universe. But as his fortune grew, so did his possessiveness, his paranoia, his need for absolute control. Her life had become a meticulously curated performance. Her friends were vetted. Her calls were monitored. Her expenses were scrutinized, all under the guise of security. He had isolated her slowly and systematically until he was her entire world. And then he had started to chip away at her sense of self, her confidence, her very identity. The world saw Evelyn Whittaker, the epitome of elegance and grace, hosting charity galas and gracing the covers of society magazines. They didn't see the woman who cried herself to sleep in a bedroom the size of a small apartment, the woman whose husband would belittle her in private, calling her naive, unsophisticated, incapable of understanding his complex world. The turning point had come 2 years ago on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Calvin had been in a rage, not a loud, theatrical rage, but a cold, quiet one that was far more terrifying. A deal had fallen through, and he had blamed her. He had accused her of being a distraction, of making him soft. He had backhanded her the force of the blow, sending her sprawling onto the plush Aubusson rug. It was the first time he had laid a hand on her, but the look in his eyes told her it wouldn't be the last. That night, as he slept soundly beside her, his breathing even and untroubled, something inside Evelyn had shifted. The fear was still there, a cold, hard stone in her chest. But now it was accompanied by something else, a sliver of ice-cold resolve. She would not be a victim. She would not be erased. She would fight back. Her fight wouldn't be with fists or with screams. It would be with the one thing Calvin valued above all else: information. He had always boasted that knowledge was power, that he knew everything about everyone who mattered. He had underestimated her, had dismissed her as a beautiful but frivolous accessory. He had never imagined that she, the silent, docile wife, could be a threat. And so her secret life began. By day, she was the perfect hostess, the doting mother, the flawless wife. By night, she was a detective in her own home, a ghost in the machine of Calvin's empire. She started small, paying attention to the hushed phone calls, the late-night meetings, the names that were whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence. She learned about the shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the labyrinthine network of trusts and holding companies that Calvin used to hide his wealth. She taught herself about forensic accounting, about data recovery, about the subtle art of social engineering. She used the skills he had so casually dismissed, her attention to detail, her memory for names and dates, her ability to read people, and turned them into weapons. She had found an unlikely ally in a disgruntled IT technician who Calvin had unceremoniously fired. The young man, a tech genius named Ben, had been a treasure trove of information. He had shown her the back doors to Calvin's servers, the digital breadcrumbs that led to a world of financial malfeasance that would make even the most jaded prosecutor's head spin. For months, they had worked in secret, communicating through encrypted channels, their digital footprints carefully erased. It had been a dangerous game, a high-wire act with no safety net. But with each piece of evidence she uncovered, her resolve hardened. This was not just about getting her fair share in the divorce. This was about justice. It was about exposing Calvin for the fraud he was not just to her, but to the world. Now, sitting in the courtroom, the culmination of her long, silent war was at hand. In her purse, nestled beside her lipstick and her compact, was a small, unassuming flash drive. It was a silver bullet aimed at the heart of Calvin Whitaker's empire. Maria Flores was finishing her closing statement, her voice filled with a quiet passion. Your Honor, Evelyn Whitaker is not asking for a handout. She is asking for what she is rightfully owed for her years of dedication, for the emotional and personal sacrifices she made for this family. She is asking for the chance to rebuild her life, to step out of the shadow of a man who has for too long defined her existence. Calvin stifled a yawn, a gesture of such profound disrespect that it sent a fresh wave of anger through Evelyn. He was so sure of his victory, so confident in his power to crush anyone who stood in his way. As Maria sat down, a wave of exhaustion washing over her faced the judge, a stern-faced woman named Eleanor Vance, who was no relation to Arthur. Vance turned her gaze to Evelyn. Mrs. Whitaker, she said, her voice unexpectedly gentle. Do you have anything you wish to say? The courtroom held its breath. The reporters leaned forward, their pens poised. Arthur Vance looked at Calvin with a smug smile. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. The moment the silent wife would finally speak and undoubtedly make a fool of herself. Evelyn felt a tremor run through her. This was it, the moment she had rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times. She took a slow, deep breath, the air filling her lungs like a shot of liquid courage. She met the judge's gaze, her own eyes clear and steady. Yes, Your Honor, she said, her voice, though quiet, ringing with a newfound strength that startled everyone in the room. I do. She rose to her feet, her movements fluid and deliberate. The room was so quiet you could hear the frantic clicking of the reporters' cameras. She walked to the front of the courtroom, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. She did not look at Calvin, though she could feel his eyes on her, a mixture of surprise and annoyance in his gaze. She stopped before the judge's bench and opened her purse. She took out the small silver flash drive. It seemed so insignificant, so mundane in the grandeur of the courtroom. But she knew the power it held. Your Honor, she said, her voice unwavering. I have been silent for a long time. I have been portrayed as a woman who knows nothing of her husband's business, as a woman who is content to live in blissful ignorance. But that is not the truth. She held up the flash drive. This, she said, her voice resonating with a power that no one in that room had ever heard from her before, is the truth. The courtroom erupted in a chorus of gasps and whispers. Arthur Vance shot to his feet, his face a mask of outrage. Objection, Your Honor. This is highly irregular. We have no knowledge of this, whatever it is. But Judge Vance silenced him with a sharp rap of her gavel. Her eyes were fixed on Evelyn, a flicker of something that looked like respect in their depths. Let her speak. Evelyn's heart was pounding a wild drum against her ribs, but her voice was calm, her hand steady as she placed the flash drive on the judge's bench. On this drive, she said, her gaze sweeping over the stunned faces in the courtroom, you will find evidence of Mr. Whitaker's true business dealings. You will find proof of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, of shell corporations in Panama, of a systematic and elaborate scheme to defraud not only me, but also his business partners and the United States government. Calvin's face had gone pale, his confident smirk replaced by a look of disbelief. He started to rise, his mouth opening to speak, but his lawyer put a restraining hand on his arm. Evelyn continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. You will find emails, bank statements, and recorded conversations that will paint a very different picture of the man who has presented himself as a pillar of the business community. You will find the truth about the Whitaker empire, a truth built on a foundation of lies, deceit, and criminal activity. She paused, letting her words hang in the air, a palpable weight in the suddenly frigid courtroom. Then she turned her head and looked directly at Calvin. For the first time in years, she did not flinch from his gaze. She met his stormy eyes with her own, now blazing with a fire that he had never seen before. You thought I was silent because I had nothing to say, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the room. You were wrong. I was silent because I was listening. And then, as the full import of her words washed over him, as the reality of his impending doom crashed down upon him, Calvin Whitaker, the billionaire titan, the master of the universe, did something no one had ever seen him do before. He collapsed. The early years of Evelyn and Calvin's marriage had been a whirlwind of champagne flutes and starlit galas, a life painted in the vibrant hues of new love and burgeoning wealth. They had met at a fundraiser for the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a world away from Evelyn's quiet upbringing in a book-filled home in Connecticut. She was an art history graduate, working as a junior curator, her passion for the Impressionists a quiet fire within her. He was a brash, handsome financier, his ambition a palpable force that seemed to bend the very air around him. He had pursued her with a single-minded intensity that she found both exhilarating and a little overwhelming. He sent her rare first editions of her favorite books, arranged private tours of closed museum wings, and flew her to Paris for a weekend on a whim. He listened to her, or so she thought, his eyes fixed on hers, as she spoke about Monet's use of light or Degas's fascination with movement. He made her feel seen, cherished, as if she were the most fascinating creature he had ever encountered. You're too good for that dusty museum, Evie, he would murmur, his voice a low, seductive rumble. Your canvas is the world. And for a while it was. Their wedding was a fairy tale affair at a sprawling estate in the Hamptons, an event so lavish it was chronicled in the glossy pages of Vogue. Their life together was a blur of international travel, of ski trips to Gestad and summers on the Amalfi Coast. Evelyn, with her innate grace and her quiet intelligence, navigated this new world with an easy elegance that made Calvin proud. She was the perfect accessory to his burgeoning empire, the serene and beautiful counterbalance to his aggressive business persona. Their first home was a palatial apartment on Park Avenue, with soaring ceilings and a view that stretched across Central Park. Evelyn filled it with art, not the sterile investment-grade pieces that were fashionable among their set, but with works that spoke to her soul, that filled the furnace rooms with color and life. Their 2 children, a son Liam and a daughter Chloe, were born into this world of privilege, their every need catered to by a small army of nannies, tutors, and drivers. To the outside world, the Whitakers were the epitome of the American dream, a golden couple blessed with beauty, wealth, and a seemingly unshakable bond. But within the gilded hood of their life, the first cracks were beginning to appear. Calvin's possessiveness, which Evelyn had initially mistaken for devotion, began to take on a darker hue. Her friends, the ones from her pre-Calvin life, were gradually phased out. He would find fault with them, a subtle criticism here, a condescending remark there. "They don't understand our life, Evie," he would say, his tone one of gentle concern. "They're simple." Her career, which had been a source of such passion and pride, was the next to go. He convinced her that with their growing family and their demanding social schedule, she simply wouldn't have the time. "You have a real talent for creating a home, for making everything beautiful." He'd told her, his words a silken trap. "That's a far more important job than anything you could do in a museum." She had believed him. She had poured her creativity and her energy into their homes, into their children, into creating a perfect world for the man she loved. She had hosted his business dinners, charmed his clients, and stood smiling by his side at countless public events. She played her part to perfection, the flawless, supportive wife. But the gilded cage was shrinking, its bars growing colder and harder. Calvin's control tightened so subtly at first that she barely noticed. He insisted on a joint email account for transparency, he'd said. He installed a state-of-the-art security system in their home, complete with cameras in every room for their protection. He hired a personal driver and a security detail for her safety. She was a bird in a cage of his own design, and he held the only key. The isolation was a slow, creeping poison. Her world, which had once been so vast and full of possibility, had shrunk to the confines of her home. Her social circle limited to the wives of Calvin's business associates, women who spoke of little else but their husbands' latest acquisitions and their children's private school applications. The man who had once listened so intently to her thoughts on art now dismissed her opinions with a wave of his hand. "Leave the thinking to me, Evie," he would say, a condescending smile on his lips. "You just focus on looking beautiful." The belittling was a constant, low-grade hum in the background of their lives. He would mock her taste in books, her choice of music, her political views. He would do it in private, his voice a low, cutting whisper, and then in public with a wink and a smile, as if it were all a joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was a systematic dismantling of her self-worth, a slow and steady erosion of her soul. She began to feel like a ghost in her own life, a beautifully dressed automaton going through the motions. The vibrant, passionate woman she had once been was fading, replaced by a pale, silent reflection. The children, too, were affected by the oppressive atmosphere in their home. Liam, A sensitive boy with his mother's artistic soul grew quiet and withdrawn. Chloe, a bright and feisty girl, became prone to outbursts of anger. They both adored their father, who would shower them with expensive gifts and grand gestures, but they were also afraid of him, of his moods, of the cold, hard glint in his eyes when he was displeased. Evelyn tried to shield them, to create a pocket of warmth and normalcy in their cold, sterile world. She would read to them for hours, take them on secret excursions to the park, and encourage their passions, Liam's for painting, Chloe's for horseback riding. But it was like trying to build a sand castle against a rising tide. The incident with the backhand had been a brutal awakening. It was the moment the subtext of their marriage had become the text. The psychological abuse had become physical, and she knew with a chilling certainty that it was only a matter of time before it happened again. That night after the incident, as Calvin slept beside her, his body radiating a heat that now felt malevolent, Evelyn had crept out of bed and gone to her study. It was the one room in the house that felt truly hers. A sanctuary filled with her books and her art. She had sat in the dark for hours. The pain in her cheek, a dull throb. The pain in her heart, a raging inferno. She had looked at herself in the ornate gilt-framed mirror above her desk. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and haunted. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. This was not who she was. This was not who she was meant to be. A flicker of the old Evelyn, the one who had once been so full of life and fire, ignited within her. It was a small, fragile flame, but it was there. And in the darkness of that night, she made a vow. She would not let him extinguish it. She would not let him win. She had no illusions about the battle ahead. Calvin was a formidable opponent with a vast fortune and an army of lawyers at his command. He was a man who collected secrets, who knew how to exploit a person's weaknesses. To fight him, she would have to become someone he would never recognize. She would have to be smarter, more patient, more ruthless than he had ever imagined she could be. Her first move was to play the part he had assigned her even more convincingly. She became the perfect docile wife, her silence a mask for the furious activity that was taking place beneath the surface. She smiled sweetly. She hosted his dinners. She wore the beautiful clothes he bought her. She let him believe he had broken her. Her second move was to start gathering information. She began to pay attention to the names he mentioned on his hushed phone calls, the documents he left lying on his desk, the fragments of conversations she overheard. She started to piece together the puzzle of his business dealings, a puzzle that was far darker and more complex than she had ever imagined. She discovered the world of offshore banking, of shell corporations, of creative accounting that bordered on outright fraud. She learned that the Whittaker Empire, which the world saw as a monument to Calvin's business genius, was in fact a house of cards, built on a foundation of tax evasion, money laundering, and illegal backroom deals. She knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed help, someone with the technical expertise to navigate the digital labyrinth of Calvin's financial world. And then she remembered Ben. Ben Carter had been a junior IT technician at Whittaker Holdings, a young, brilliant coder who had been fired for a minor infraction, a scapegoat for a larger security breach that had been Calvin's own fault. Evelyn had always liked Ben, had found him to be a kind and decent young man. She had a feeling he would be more than willing to help her bring Calvin down. Finding him had been a challenge. He had, it seemed, dropped off the face of the earth. But Evelyn was a woman with a newfound purpose. She used her skills, her intelligence, her ability to connect the dots. and she found him living in a small, cramped apartment in Queens, working as a freelance cybersecurity consultant. He had been wary at first, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and suspicion. But as she laid out her story, as he saw the quiet determination in her eyes, his skepticism turned to a grim resolve. He too had a score to settle with Calvin Whitaker. Together they became a clandestine team, a two-person army waging a secret war against a corporate Goliath. By day, Evelyn was the perfect wife, her life a carefully orchestrated performance. By night, she was a digital warrior, her study transformed into a command center, her computer screen a battlefield. Ben was her guide, her mentor, her partner in this high-stakes game. He taught her how to use encrypted communication channels, how to clone hard drives, how to trace the flow of money through a dizzying network of international banks. He was the architect of their digital assault, and she was the boots on the ground, the spy in the enemy camp. For months, they worked in the shadows, their every move a calculated risk. There were close calls moments when she thought they would be discovered. But they were careful, they were meticulous, and they were driven by a shared sense of purpose. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to amass a mountain of evidence, a digital smoking gun that would expose Calvin's crimes to the world. They found the hidden ledgers, the coded emails, the recordings of his incriminating conversations. They uncovered a shadow empire, a world of darkness and deceit that lay hidden behind the glittering facade of the Whitaker name. The flash drive was the culmination of their work, a Pandora's box of secrets that she now held in her hand. It was the key to her freedom, the weapon that would finally bring down the man who had tried to destroy her. As she stood before the judge, the courtroom in an uproar, her gaze locked on her husband's collapsing form, she felt a strange sense of calm. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long was gone, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. She had been in a gilded cage for 15 years, a beautiful prisoner in a life of luxury. But now the cage was broken, and she was finally, terrifyingly free. The transformation of Evelyn Whitaker from a society wife into a forensic investigator began in the dead of night in the hushed quiet of her Park Avenue apartment. While Calvin slept, his breathing a steady, untroubled rhythm beside her, Evelyn would slip out of their cavernous bedroom and pad down the hallway to her study. This room, once a sanctuary for her art books and quiet contemplation, became her war room. Her first forays were tentative, clumsy. She started with the physical world, the tangible remnants of Calvin's business life that he carelessly left in his wake. He was a man who believed himself to be untouchable, and his arrogance was his Achilles heel. He would leave unlocked briefcases in his home office, half-shredded documents in the wastebasket, and his personal laptop logged in and open on his desk. In the beginning, she didn't know what she was looking for. She would photograph documents with her phone, her hands trembling, the click of the shutter sounding like a gunshot in the silent house. She would piece together shredded papers on her desk, the task a frustrating jigsaw puzzle that yielded cryptic names of companies she'd never heard of. Viridian Holdings, Azure, Global Odyssey Trust. The names sounded innocuous, even poetic, but a cold knot of intuition told her they were anything but. She created a secret email account and began a digital scrapbook of her findings, a chaotic collection of names, dates, and account numbers that slowly began to form a terrifying picture. Calvin wasn't just aggressive in his business dealings. He was operating in a legal and ethical gray area that was rapidly bleeding into black. But she soon realized that the paper trail was only the surface. The real secrets, the truly damning evidence would be digital, and for that, she needed help. She needed Ben Carter. Finding Ben was the first real test of her newfound resolve. Calvin had not just fired him. He had systematically destroyed the young man's reputation, blacklisting him from every major tech firm in the city. Ben had become a ghost, his digital footprint all but erased. But Evelyn remembered a detail from a long-ago conversation at a company picnic. Ben had mentioned his sister, a pastry chef, who owned a small bakery in Brooklyn. It was a long shot, but it was all she had. One crisp autumn afternoon, under the guise of trying a new patisserie she'd read about, Evelyn had her driver take her to a charming flower-dusted shop called the Rolling Pin. She bought a box of macarons and, with her heart pounding, asked the friendly young woman behind the counter if she knew a Ben Carter. The woman's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Whose asking Evelyn had rehearsed this moment. She didn't lie. Not entirely. "My name is Evelyn Whittaker," she said softly. "Your brother used to work for my husband. I believe he was treated unfairly. I want to help." Perhaps it was the desperation in her eyes, or the simple fact that she was there in person, that convinced Ben's sister. She disappeared into the back of the shop and returned a few minutes later with a slip of paper. On it was a single untraceable burner phone number. Their first conversation was tense. Ben was understandably paranoid. "How do I know this isn't a trap?" he'd asked, his voice tight with suspicion. "How do I know Calvin Whittaker didn't send you?" Because Evelyn had replied, her own voice low and urgent. "I have more to lose than you do. He's my husband, and I'm going to take him down. But I can't do it alone." She told him everything. The years of emotional abuse, the gilded kedge, the backhand that had shattered her illusions, the pieces of the puzzle she had already gathered. She spoke with a raw honesty that cut through his fear. By the end of the call, he was in. Revenge, he admitted, was a powerful motivator. But so was justice. Their collaboration began with a series of clandestine meetings in anonymous coffee shops and quiet corners of public parks. Ben, with his pale, intense face and his perpetually hoodie-clad frame, was a stark contrast to the elegant Chanel-clad Evelyn. They were an unlikely pair of conspirators, a study in social and economic opposites united by a common enemy. Ben became her tutor in the dark arts of digital espionage. He taught her about VPNs, encrypted messaging apps, and the importance of burner devices. He explained the concept of shell corporations and how they were used to launder money and hide assets. He drew diagrams on napkins explaining the complex web of transactions that moved money from a legitimate New York bank account to an untraceable trust in the Cayman Islands. Under his guidance, Evelyn's study transformed. She purchased a new laptop, one that was never connected to her home Wi-Fi network. She used public networks, her face obscured by a hat and sunglasses as she logged on from coffee shops and libraries. Ben installed a suite of sophisticated software on her machine tools that could clone hard drives, recover deleted files, and crack passwords. Her first major breakthrough came one night when Calvin was away on a business trip to Hong Kong. He had left his personal laptop in his home office, a foolish oversight born of his unshakable arrogance. Evelyn, her heart hammering against her ribs, slipped into the room. It was a space she had always hated, a monument to Calvin's ego, all dark wood, leather, and chrome. Following Ben's instructions, which he relayed to her via an encrypted chat, she connected a small, nondescript device to Calvin's laptop. It was a hard drive cloner, a piece of equipment that would create a perfect bit-for-bit copy of his entire digital life. The process took hours in which Evelyn sat in the dark, every creak of the old building sending a jolt of terror through her. When it was finally done, she had it. A complete mirror image of Calvin's hard drive, a treasure trove of his secrets. The next day, she met Ben in a noisy food court, the anonymity of the crowd a comfort. They huddled over her laptop, and Ben went to work. What they found was staggering. It was worse than Evelyn had ever imagined. Calvin had a second hidden set of books for his company, a shadow ledger that detailed the true astronomical profits he was hiding from the IRS. He had a network of over 30 shell corporations registered in a dizzying array of tax havens: Panama, the British Virgin Islands, Liechtenstein. He was using these companies to launder money for a shadowy consortium of international clientsmen whose names were whispered in the darkest corners of the internet. There were emails that detailed his plans to bribe a foreign official for a lucrative government contract. There were audio files, recordings of conversations he had secretly made of his business partners, which he used as leverage to force them into unfavorable deals. There were spreadsheets that tracked his hidden assets, a fortune far greater than the one he publicly claimed, a fortune that was meant to be invisible to any divorce court. But the most damning evidence, the piece that made Evelyn's blood run cold, was a file labeled Evelyn. In it, she found a series of reports from a private investigator Calvin had hired to follow her. There were photographs of her having lunch with her friends, transcripts of her phone calls, even a detailed analysis of her online shopping habits. He had been spying on her for years, his paranoia a suffocating net she had never even known was there. The discovery was a violation, a profound and sickening betrayal. But it was also a gift. It erased any lingering doubt, any shred of sentimentality she might have had for the man she had once loved. He was not just a criminal, he was a monster, and he needed to be stopped. The final piece of the puzzle was a series of encrypted transactions to a trust in the Cayman Islands named the Serafina Trust. The name struck a chord with Evelyn. Serafina had been the name of her grandmother, a detail she had shared with Calvin in the early, intimate days of their relationship. It was a cruel, twisted inside joke, a way for him to flaunt his hidden wealth right under her nose. With Ben's help, she was able to trace the source of the funds flowing into the Serafina Trust. It was a complex web designed to be untraceable. But Ben was a genius, and Calvin, for all his cunning, had made mistakes. He had used the same set of passwords across multiple platforms, a rookie error that allowed Ben to gain access to a key offshore server. What they found there was the Holy Grail, the unredacted official documents establishing the Serafina Trust, with Calvin Whitaker as the sole beneficiary. The trust held over $2 billion in assets, a secret fortune that he had no intention of ever declaring. They downloaded everything: the emails, the audio files, the spreadsheets, the trust documents. They organized it all, creating a clear, concise, and utterly damning portfolio of Calvin Whitaker's criminal enterprise. They saved it all on a single encrypted flash drive. A small silver bullet for a very large monster. The weeks leading up to the end of the trial were a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Evelyn played her part to perfection, her silent, subdued presence in the courtroom, a masterpiece of misdirection. She listened as Calvin's lawyers painted her as a weak, vapid, and greedy woman. She endured the condescending smirks of her husband. She held her tongue, her silence, a shield, her secret, a burning fire within her. She knew that what she was about to do was a gamble. It was unorthodox, a piece of courtroom theatre that could easily backfire. But it was a risk she had to take. She could not let him get away with it. She could not let him erase her and then walk away with his empire, his reputation, and his secrets intact. On the final day of the trial, as she sat in the courtroom, the flash drive in her purse felt like a talisman, a source of strength. She had gone from a prisoner to a warrior, from a victim to the architect of her own liberation. When the judge asked her if she had anything to say, the moment she had been waiting for had arrived. The fear was still there, a faint tremor in the background, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, unshakable resolve. She was no longer Evelyn Whittaker, the silent wife. She was Evelyn Whittaker, the woman who knew the truth, and she was about to make sure that the whole world knew it too. The moment Evelyn Whittaker placed the silver flash drive on the judge's bench, the courtroom's decorum shattered. A shockwave of gasps and frantic whispers rolled through the gallery as the incessant clicking of cameras became a deafening volley. Arthur Vance, his face mottling with rage, shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is a circus, a mockery. This stunt is inadmissible." Calvin himself appeared frozen, staring at the small piece of metal with a flicker of confusion. It was clear he saw this as a final desperate act from a hysterical woman, another emotional outburst his lawyer would swat away. He was not yet afraid. But Judge Eleanor Vance's sharp eyes were fixed on Evelyn. She saw not hysteria, but a woman of profound composure whose stillness commanded attention. "Silence!" Her voice cut through the din, punctuated by a sharp crack of her gavel. "Mr. Vance, sit down. Mrs. Whittaker, you will explain the meaning of this, and it had better be compelling." Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice was as cool and clear as ice. "Your Honor, this court has heard a work of fiction, a story of a brilliant man burdened by a frivolous wife who now seeks an unearned fortune." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room before landing on Calvin. "That narrative is a lie," she gestured to the flash drive. "This is non-fiction. It contains the truth of the Whittaker Empire, a truth my husband has gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal from this court and from the Internal Revenue Service." "Objection!" Vance roared. "Wild, unsubstantiated accusations." "This is slander." "Is it Mr. Vance?" Evelyn's voice sliced back. "Then you won't mind if the court examines its contents." Judge Vance held up a hand. "You are making very serious allegations, Mrs. Whittaker." "I understand perfectly." "Your Honor," Evelyn replied, her voice unwavering, "just as I now understand the consequences of remaining silent. My husband prides himself on knowing everyone's secrets. He just never imagined I would learn to use that strength against him." The dawning horror on Calvin's face showed he finally understood. This was not a plea. This was an execution. "Your Honor," Evelyn continued, turning back to the bench. "On this drive is a complete mirrored copy of my husband's personal hard drive, along with files recovered from the offshore servers of Whittaker Holdings. It contains, among other things..." She began to list its contents, each word a hammer blow against the foundation of Calvin's life. A hidden ledger for Whittaker Holdings, detailing over $3 billion in undeclared income. The reporters scribbled furiously. A detailed list of more than 30 shell corporations in Panama and the Cayman Islands used to launder money and evade U.S. taxes. Arthur Vance sank into his chair, his face ashen. "Emails between my husband and Mr. Sergei Volkov, a man currently under sanction by the U.S. Treasury Department discussing the movement of untraceable funds. A gasp went through the gallery. 2 men in the front row. Calvin's senior partners exchanged horrified glances as she continued. Audio recordings of my husband blackmailing them into selling their shares for a fraction of their worth. And finally, Evelyn said, her voice dropping, you will find the founding documents for a trust in the Cayman Islands called the Serafina Trust, a trust that currently holds over $2 billion in hidden assets of which my husband is the sole beneficiary. She let the name hang in the air, then locked eyes with Calvin. He named it after my grandmother. A private joke, I suppose. This final intimate detail was the most devastating blow. It was a revelation of such profound cruelty that it stripped away the last vestiges of Calvin's facade. The powerful titan vanished, replaced by a common thief, a petty vindictive man. For a long moment, the courtroom was utterly silent. Calvin stared into the middle distance, his face a ghastly white. His arrogance, his confidence, his very presence seemed to shrink. He was a man watching the complex architecture of his life, built on a foundation of lies, get demolished by the one person he had never considered a threat. Then his eyes rolled back in his head. A low, guttural sound escaped his lips, and his body went slack. He slumped forward, his head hitting the defense table with a sickening thud. Before he slid from his chair, a boneless, undignified heap on the floor. The room exploded. "Medic!" someone screamed. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, capturing the ignominious fall. Amid the pandemonium, as paramedics rushed in and court officers struggled to control the chaos, Evelyn Whittaker stood perfectly still. She didn't watch her husband being lifted onto a stretcher, his face pale and unconscious. She simply looked at the judge, her expression unreadable. There was no triumph, no elation, only the quiet, profound finality of an ending. The monster had been slain. The silent wife was at last irrevocably free. The collapse of Calvin Whittaker was a detonation that sent shockwaves from Wall Street to the highest circles of New York society. The media frenzy was instantaneous and merciless. Headlines painted a brutal, sensational picture. Billionaire crook collapses as wife exposes secret empire and the silent wife's revenge. How Evelyn Whittaker dismantled a dynasty. The story of his courtroom downfall became a viral legend overnight. Calvin's physical recovery from the stress-induced mini-stroke was swift, but it led only to a more profound ruin. He walked out of the hospital not into a chauffeured car, but into the custody of FBI agents. The flash drive was a prosecutor's dream, an irrefutable roadmap of a decade of criminal activity. The U.S. Attorney's Office moved quickly, leveling charges that ranged from tax evasion and money laundering to wire fraud and conspiracy. The international scope of his crimes, particularly his dealings with the sanctioned oligarch Sergei Volkov, ensured the scandal made global headlines. His empire, Whittaker Holdings, crumbled into bankruptcy, its assets froze in its name, a synonym for disgrace. The palatial homes, the private jet. The entire architecture of his wealth was systematically seized by the federal government. His powerful friends vanished, leaving him a social pariah awaiting an inevitable prison sentence. The man who wielded fear as a weapon found himself utterly alone, stripped of everything he valued. For Evelyn, the aftermath was a disorienting paradox. She was suddenly one of the most famous women in America, hounded by reporters and flooded with lucrative offers for book deals and interviews. She refused them all. She had not sought fame. She had fought for justice and freedom. Now that she had them, she craved only peace. With the help of her lawyer, Maria Flores, Evelyn navigated the legal fallout. The divorce was a formality. While the government seized the bulk of Calvin's illicit fortune, the court awarded Evelyn a settlement that guaranteed her and her children's futures. But the money was merely a tool. The real prize was her autonomy. She and the children, Liam and Chloe, left the oppressive grandeur of Park Avenue behind. Their new home was a bright, airy brownstone on a quiet, tree-lined street in Brooklyn. It was a fraction of the size of their old residence, but felt infinitely larger, filled with the promise of a new beginning rather than the ghosts of a toxic marriage. The children, though shaken by their father's fall, proved resilient. They had witnessed their mother's quiet courage, and it had empowered them. In the warmth of their new home, away from the suffocating pressure of their old life, they began to heal. Liam's art exploded with newfound color and life, while Chloe's laughter returned echoing through a nearby equestrian center. Evelyn, too, began the slow process of rediscovering herself. She shed the designer armor she had worn for years, finding comfort in simple clothes that felt like her own. She reconnected with old friends whose honesty was a balm after years of social calculation. She enrolled in art history classes, not for a degree, but for the simple joy of reigniting a long-dormant passion. The scars remained. There were days marked by waves of anxiety, phantom echoes of the fear that had been her constant companion. Healing, she learned, was not a destination, but a quiet, steady journey. One spring evening about a year after the trial, she sat in her small garden, the air fragrant with jasmine. Liam was strumming a guitar in his room, and Chloe was chatting with a friend upstairs. It was a scene of such simple, profound peace. Reading a book of poetry, a line resonated deep within her. Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift. She thought of Calvin and the crucible of her marriage. The darkness had not destroyed her. It had forged her. It had revealed a strength she never knew she possessed. The gift was not the pain, but her survival of it. A few weeks later, a letter from Ben Carter arrived. The government had given him a substantial reward for his role in the case, which he had used to start his own cybersecurity firm, dedicated to helping victims of financial fraud. "You inspired me to use my skills for good," he wrote. "Thank you, Evelyn." A genuine smile touched her lips. She picked up her phone and dialed his number. "Ben?" she said, her voice clear and full of purpose. "It's Evelyn. I have an idea." The silent wife was a memory. In her place stood a woman defining herself on her own terms, a survivor, a mother and a woman who was about to turn a box full of darkness into a beacon of light for others. Evelyn Whitaker's story isn't just a tale of revenge. It's a powerful testament to the silent strength that resides in so many who feel trapped and voiceless. It's a reminder that the most underestimated person in the room is often the most observant, and that true power isn't about the noise you make, but the truth you hold. Evelyn's journey from a gilded cage to a life of purpose, using her settlement to establish a foundation that helps victims of financial and domestic abuse, shows that our deepest wounds can become our greatest strengths. Her story resonates because it's a story of liberation, a fight not just for justice, but for the right to one's own soul. If Evelyn's incredible journey from silent wife to unstoppable force moved you, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of courage and resilience. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you won't miss our next real-life drama, that will have you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for listening.